Okay, so picture this. I'm in Greece, right? This tiny village, tucked away on a hillside, sun setting, super picturesque. And I'm really trying to ask this sweet old woman for directions.
Okay.
And I really thought I was like nailing my Greek.
Yeah.
You know? But things took a turn.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it turns out I kind of accidentally claimed to be her long-lost granddaughter.
Oh, no. Did you manage to straighten things out?
Eventually. But it was definitely a crash course in lost in translation, let me tell you.
Wow.
And it made me realize, like really drove it home, just how important pragmatics is. You know, that art of using language, the right way, the right context, all those subtle cues we just take for granted.
Yeah.
So no pressure on us today.
None at all. But it is a fascinating area.
Yeah.
And today, we are your guides to the subtle, sometimes tricky world of pragmatics.
I like it.
Plus, we'll be tackling phonology, how the sounds of a language can make or break your attempts at fluency.
Music to a language learner's ears.
Right.
And you know what, my Greek misadventure? It really brings up a key point.
What's that?
I might have had, like, the basic vocab down, you know?
Okay.
But I totally missed those unspoken rules.
Yeah.
Like the cultural context that gives words their full meaning.
Absolutely. It's like knowing the ingredients to a recipe,
Right.
but not knowing how to actually cook the dish.
Exactly.
You need that understanding of how it all comes together.
Yeah.
And research shows there are actually stages to mastering this art of pragmatics.
Stages, you say?
Stages.
Do tell. I'm all about a good framework.
Well, let's take the simple act of making a request.
Okay.
Something we do all the time without even thinking.
Right, of course, yeah.
Researchers Gabrielle Casper and Kenneth Rose, they found that language learners, they go through 5 distinct stages in this area.
This is already reminding me of those early days, fumbling through a new language. Oh, so good.
Right. So picture this. Stage 1, you're basically a mime. Minimal language, heavy reliance on pointing.
Oh, yeah.
And just hoping for the best.
Yep.
Think sir. Or just gesturing wildly at the menu.
Oh, I'm intimately familiar with that stage. The point and pray method.
Exactly. Then comes the formulaic stage where you bust out those memorized phrases.
Yes.
Like, let's play, or 1 coffee, please.
Yes.
You may not fully grasp the grammar, but hey, it gets the job done.
Ah, the comfort of a well-placed phrase book.
Right.
But I imagine it doesn't last forever.
True.
Yeah.
Things get interesting at stage 3, the unpacking stage. You're starting to build real sentences like, can you pass the salt, please?
Okay.
You're understanding the mechanics of making a request.
Okay. So there's actual sentence construction happening.
Yes.
You're not just relying on memorized chunks anymore.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And as you gain confidence, you hit stage 4, pragmatic expansion, where your requests get a bit fancier.
Okay, getting fan.
Right. This is where you might add a reason
Okay.
to soften the request. Like, could I borrow your pen? Because mine seems to have gone on an adventure.
Okay, so there's strategy involved now.
Yeah.
You're not just asking, you're giving context.
Right.
Being mindful of the social dynamics.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And finally, you reach the holy grail, stage 5,
Okay.
fine-tuning.
Fine-tuning.
This is where you intuitively adapt your language to the context,
Okay.
knowing when to be super polite, informal, or even a bit cheeky.
That native-like fluency, but for politeness. It's like you're fluent in the unspoken rules. But this whole progression, it really highlights how much is going on beneath the surface
Right.
of a simple conversation.
Yeah.
I mean, imagine going through all of that while trying to order a coffee.
And this is just one aspect of pragmatics. There's a whole world of unspoken rules around making suggestions, disagreeing politely, navigating different social situations.
And those can be even trickier than a simple request.
Right.
I'm already thinking about all the times I probably messed those up
Yeah.
without even realizing it.
Of course, yeah.
Tell me more about the nuances of navigating suggestions, especially in a more formal setting.
You're right. Those nuances, they can be like landmines.
Right.
Even for experienced language learners.
Totally.
So imagine you're in a university setting,
Okay.
meeting with an advisor.
Yeah.
Researchers Kathleen Bardovi-Harlig and Beverly Hartford.
Okay.
They found some fascinating differences
Okay.
between how native and non-native English speakers,
Okay.
they navigated suggestions in this context.
Okay, I'm already intrigued.
Mhm.
What did they observe? Were people stumbling over academic jargon, or was it something deeper?
It was more about the subtleties of how suggestions were made and responded to. For instance, non-native speakers, they were often less likely to put forward their own ideas, taking a more passive role in the conversation.
Interesting. So maybe hesitant to like rock the boat.
Yeah.
Especially in a situation where they're already navigating a new language, new culture.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And when it came to rejecting a suggestion, that's where things got even more interesting. Non-native speakers, because they were still learning, like the etiquette, they would sometimes reject things in a way that could seem overly blunt.
Ouch. I can see how that would lead to misunderstandings.
Right.
Like what might seem like a simple no thanks in one language could come off as like super rude in another.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And it all comes down to these mitigation strategies, ways of softening your language to make it more palatable. Native speakers, without even thinking about it, were pros at this. They'd say things like, "That's a great idea. But my schedule's already packed." Or, "I'm leaning toward a different approach for this project." They were acknowledging the suggestion, providing a reason for their rejection, and doing it all in a way that maintained that polite, professional tone.
It's like they're threading a needle.
Yeah.
You have to be assertive.
Yes.
But also respectful.
Yes.
All while navigating a new language. Did the researchers find that these non-native speakers improved over time?
Yes.
Even if they weren't like explicitly taught these strategies?
They did.
Right.
They saw progress.
Okay.
Over several months, the non-native speakers became more comfortable.
Okay.
Offering their own suggestions and providing reasons for their rejections.
Okay.
But that consistent use of mitigation, that took more time and practice. It really highlights how crucial it is to pay attention to those subtle cues. Even when we think we're being perfectly clear.
It makes you realize just how much we pick up on implicitly. As native speakers. Without even realizing we have this whole like other system of politeness ingrained in us.
Yes.
Okay, so we've tackled like the social side of language. But what about the times when we like literally can't even get the sounds right?
Yes. The ever-tricky world of phonology.
Yes, exactly.
Because even when you've mastered the art of the polite request, sometimes your tongue just refuses to cooperate.
Tell me about it. I think we've all had those moments where we're convinced our mouths are physically incapable of producing a certain sound. Or even better, those times when you think you're nailing it. Only to realize you've been saying a word completely wrong this whole time. It's humbling, to say the least.
Absolutely. And there's a scientific reason why some sounds, they feel like climbing Mount Everest with your tongue. It all comes down to this concept of first language interference. Basically our native language. It shapes how we hear and produce sounds, even in a new language.
So it's like our mouths and brains have been like trained for one specific set of sounds. And anything outside that comfort zone requires some serious rewiring.
Precisely. Think of it like this. If you grow up speaking Japanese, the sounds, L and R, often sound the same. Because they're not distinct sounds in the language. So English words like light and right can be incredibly difficult to differentiate. Both in terms of pronouncing them and even hearing the difference.
Which is how you end up with those classic like language learning mishaps. Like accidentally ordering fried lice instead of fried rice.
Exactly.
Yeah, we've all been there. Some more literally than others.
It works both ways, of course. English speakers, we often struggle with sounds that don't exist in English, like the rolled R in Spanish. Or those guttural sounds in German.
It's amazing how a sound that seems so straightforward to a native speaker can feel like an Olympic gymnastics routine. For a language learner.
Absolutely. And it's not just about individual sounds either. Let's say you're learning English. And your native language is Spanish. You might add an extra vowel to words that start with certain consonant clusters. Because those clusters are less common in Spanish. So instead of school, you might say eschool. Or speak instead of speak.
Speak. That's a perfect example. It's fascinating how our brains try to like bridge the gap between the familiar sounds of our native language
Yeah.
and the unfamiliar territory of a new one. But I imagine this kind of, what do you call it? Overcompensation.
Overcompensating.
That can lead to some interesting pronunciation quirks.
Absolutely. Learners might pick up on a rule and then apply it a bit too enthusiastic.
Right.
Right. They're demonstrating that they're grasping the underlying structure of the language.
Right.
Even if the execution isn't perfect, it's a positive sign of progress.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like those adorable mistakes kids make when they're first learning grammar, you know?
Right.
Like, I go to the park instead of, I went. It's not quite right, but it's like you can see their little brains just trying to make sense of the rules.
Exactly. And just like with those grammatical overgeneralizations, those pronunciation quirks, they're just a natural part of the learning process, you know?
Right.
It doesn't mean someone's not making progress. It just means their internal sound system is doing a bit of catch-up.
It really makes you appreciate the mental gymnastics involved in mastering a new language.
Yeah.
Even at the level of individual sounds, it's not just mimicking, it's almost like rewiring your brain's sound processing system, you know?
Right.
Which reminds me, we were talking about those tricky consonant clusters.
Yeah.
Didn't you say there was some research about how learners can sometimes hear the differences, but still struggle to actually produce those sounds?
You're thinking of the work of Evelyn Altenberg.
Okay.
She studied Spanish speakers learning English, and she found something really intriguing. They could often recognize the correct English pronunciation.
Okay.
For example, they could tell that spi at the beginning of a word was more natural than, say, zbi, even though those sounds don't exist in Spanish.
Okay, so their ears knew what was up.
Yes.
But their tongues weren't on board.
Precisely. It's like their brains were still catching up with the physical demands of making those unfamiliar sounds.
Right.
Even though they understood, like, the concept.
Yeah, which makes me think about the whole debate around accents. Like, it's great to embrace your unique way of speaking a language, of course, but you know, there's no denying that strong accents can sometimes make communication harder. Where do you even begin to find that balance?
It's a tricky one. On the one hand, you know, you don't want to discourage learners from embracing their own voices. Every accent carries its own, you know, history, its own musicality.
Right.
But we also have to acknowledge, you know, those real world situations where intelligibility is key.
Like, how much should we strive for that native like ideal, especially if it comes at the expense of someone's like confidence or even their sense of identity?
I think a good starting point is shifting our focus away from that native-like pronunciation as the ultimate goal, you know?
Okay.
Instead, let's prioritize clarity and making sure you're understood.
So less about sounding like a native speaker.
Yeah.
More about making sure your message actually lands.
Exactly. After all, communication is about connecting, sharing ideas, and building relationships. A clear, comprehensible accent is fantastic.
Right.
But it shouldn't come at the cost of someone feeling self-conscious or like they have to, like, erase a part of who they are.
Especially since erasing your accent completely can be like incredibly tough, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Like even with tons of practice, sometimes that hint of your native language, it shines through.
Absolutely. Research shows that the length of time you've been exposed to a language,
right,
how often you use your first language, even your personality, can all impact your accent.
Okay.
Plus, as we talked about earlier, there's often a deep cultural and emotional connection to how we choose to speak a language.
It's like my Greek grandmother's story wouldn't be nearly as funny without my, shall we say, developing Greek accent.
Exactly. But even though we want to celebrate those differences, that doesn't mean we should just like throw pronunciation out the window entirely.
Right.
You know, there are things learners can do to boost their clarity without aiming for a perfect native accent.
Okay, I'm all ears. What are some of those strategies beyond just like drilling individual sounds?
Well, researchers, Tracy During and her colleagues, they found that focusing on what we call suprasegmentals can make a world of difference.
Suprasegmentals. Okay, you're gonna have to break that one down for me.
Okay.
Sounds a bit intimidating.
Don't worry, it's not as complicated as it sounds. These are those elements of speech that go beyond individual sounds.
Okay.
Things like stress, rhythm, and intonation. It's about understanding the music of a language.
So it's not just about hitting the right notes. It's about the timing, the emphasis, the way those notes flow together to create a melody.
You got it. Think about it. You can play the right notes on a piano, but,
Yeah.
without the right rhythm and dynamics, it's not going to sound like music. Language is the same way.
That's a fantastic analogy.
Yeah.
And it makes me realize how much we take those subtleties for granted in our own language.
Yeah.
Like the way our voice rises and falls naturally, the pauses, the way we emphasize certain words. Those nuances convey so much meaning.
Yes.
Without us even thinking about it.
And mastering those aspects of pronunciation, it can make you so much more engaging and easy to understand as a speaker.
Right.
Regardless of whether you have a slight accent.
So it's about finding that sweet spot.
Yes.
Striving for clarity.
Yes.
Making sure you're understood, but also embracing the unique qualities that make your voice your own.
Precisely. Because at the end of the day, language is about so much more than just sounding perfect. It's about expressing yourself authentically, connecting with others, and appreciating the amazing tapestry of communication in all its forms.
I love that. What a beautiful way to wrap up our deep dive into pragmatics and phonology.
Yes.
If our listeners take away just one thing from today's episode, what would you want it to be?
Oh, that's easy. Remember that every language, every accent, every voice has a story to tell. Embrace the journey. Celebrate the progress you make, and never be afraid to let your unique voice shine through.
And on that note, we'll wrap up this episode of The Deep Dive. Keep those language learning adventures going, and we'll catch you next time.